Thank you.
Jennifer Kuhn from the Legislative Analyst's Office, and we released our higher ed analysis last week. I was going to speak directly from the report. Thought I'd spend just a minute on some overview topics, but then dive to performance, which the legislature has indicated it would like to embed as part of its budget deliberations, and then make some very high-level comments on enrollment, operations, facilities, and cost of sharing. Very quickly, because I know that you'll be talking about these issues in more depth as you move forward. Starting on page 12 of the report, it shows core funding for each of the segments, focused then on both state general fund as well as tuition revenue. So this is figure 5 on page 12. And just starting at the top, you can see that for UC, their budget, total core funding again, state general fund and student tuition revenue, $6.3 billion. Under the governor's proposal, he's increasing it, the $140 million, a 2% increase. This is what you've been hearing earlier today. All of the increase is coming from the state. For CSU, you can see their total core funding budget of $5.4 billion, the increase of $158 million. It's a 3% increase, and again, you can see it's all coming from the state general fund. Just moving down to community colleges, their core funding budget, again, less reliant on student fee revenue, more reliant on local property tax monies. Their core funds budget is $8.7 billion, an increase of $737 million year over year. Of that $737 million, $500 million is for adult education consortia, so it's helping to fund the state's restructured adult education system. If you were to exclude that, although you wouldn't necessarily want to do that, funding adult education is part of what community colleges do, but without that, the increase would be 3%. On page 13, there's just a list of budget proposals. That's what you'll be working through systematically in the weeks to come. So talking about, over the last few years, the legislature has taken action to develop some performance measures, to ask the segments to develop targets, and then voiced an interest in using those budget reviews to inform its budget deliberations. If you turn to page 15, it lists the performance measures that the state has adopted. And what this particular figure shows is current performance, in most cases, 2013-14, and the target, and here it's just shown for 2017-18. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through every aspect of the table, but I think highlighting just a few things will illustrate a broader point. If you look, for example, under graduation rates, the 4-year rate for freshman entrance is at UC. You can see that they're at 62%. They have a goal of getting to 66% by 2017. You can see for CSU, their 6-year rate, that they're at 53%. They have a plan to getting to 55%. So these aren't necessarily their aspirational targets. What the state asked them to do is, under the governor's plan, tell us what you plan to do, what you plan to achieve over this period. So as you can see, they've planned to achieve some modest improvements in their graduation rates. A key issue for you is this enough? Is moving from 53% to 55% between 2013 and 2017 sufficient progress? Going down in the table, you can see funding per degree as well as units per degree, two measures that are often looked at from an efficiency perspective. Are students able to get out with fewer excess units? Are they able to get out with less spending per degree? You can see at both UC and CSU, from where they are right now to where they plan to be in 2017, increases in spending per degree, and no reduction in units per degree or in excess units. So again, it might be something that you want to consider, rather than just having the segments tell you what they plan to do, what is it that you would hope that they would achieve over this period of time? And is this improvement in this graduation rates and the sort of lack of improvement in units per degree and funding per degree something that you think is acceptable, or something that you would like to participate in dialogue with the universities to see if you might want to set different targets? Again, working collaboratively with them to figure out what is realistic with the resources at hand. On page 17, the state has, and the community college system has similar performance measures that are better tailored to the community college system. For example, they have a completion rate somewhat comparable to a graduation rate. This is for students who indicate they have a serious academic plan. How many of them within 6 years complete an associate's degree transfer, complete enough courses to transfer? You can see it's 48% overall. and that their target is to improve by 1% of this rate. So for example, to improve from 48% to 48.5% year over year. Again, it's a very similar issue for you. Is this adequate, or would you hope that these targets might be more ambitious? You can see also on community colleges, just turning a few pages in the report to page 20, that their 6-year completion rates have been slightly declining, even when you take a broader perspective and you look back in time. So turning then from performance to the basic cost components of the universities and the community colleges budget, and starting with enrollment. There's been lots of conversation already today about enrollment. The governor for UC and CSU takes one approach, which is not to have enrollment expectations. And his approach has been, well, I don't really want to do enrollment-based budgeting for UC and CSU because this undermines a conversation about quality. But then for community colleges, he provides 2% enrollment growth. And he provides some money that's specifically for student support and success. So we'd encourage you to take more of his approach for community colleges, which is not to have to choose between access and quality, but every year you're really focused on how to balance access and quality, just as he's doing with the community colleges. We would recommend you do for UC and CSU. That is determining how much enrollment growth you want at each system, and then if there are extra endeavors you want to improve student support, student success, you make targeted investments in those areas. So to help you get your hands around what is appropriate enrollment growth at each of the segments, we did what we normally do in terms of looking at public high school graduates, looking at the college-age population in California, looking at the segment's admission data, and trying to figure out what it tells us. So demographically, the college-age population is declining. Between 2015 and 2016, it's going down about 1%. It's steadily declining, projected to, over the next 5 years. So when you look all the way out to 2020, the college-age population, 18 to 24-year-olds, is about 300,000 individuals fewer than 2015. So then we also looked at their admits and how many students they're turning away. And UC indicates that it's still admitting all eligible students, both freshmen and transfers, somewhere in the system. CSU indicates that it's not admitting all eligible transfer students. When we look at their admits for freshmen, it does appear that they're still drawing from their master plan eligibility pool. When you look at their transfer students, it's a little bit more complicated in that if they're turning away non-local transfer students, we're not sure there's a capacity issue, and that CSU is designed to serve local students. So if the student had applied to their local campus and gotten in, then it's not clear there's a capacity issue. So we've just been suggesting that you ask CSU for some finer grain detail so that you could determine, is there an access problem? Is there a campus that's turning away eligible local transfer students and not accepting any non-local transfer students such that they don't have capacity already existing if they just reorganized how they did their admits? For community colleges, you've talked about this a little. In the current year, they got 2% growth. In the current year, they got 2.75% growth. Based on their current enrollment, they're coming in at about 2% growth. So it's unlikely that they'll get all the way to 2.75% in the current year, in 14-15. So it's something that you'll have more data on in May to try to figure out what you want to do both in the current year and the budget year. What happens in the current year will just happen automatically in terms of how much access they were actually able to provide. If it's 2% in the current year, it's likely that something like 2% in the budget year would be reasonable. So just some final comments on operations, facilities, and cost of education. If you turn to page 37, you'll see that right now the state is taking very different approaches on how specifically it's funding each of the higher education segments. So you can see in some cases there's very few strings attached. For UC, it's giving them 4%. As you've already talked about today, this is creating some, I think, confusion and frustration because you're not quite sure what you're getting from the 4%. Have you gotten enrollment growth or haven't you? Have you gotten just mandatory cost increases? Have you gotten retirement increases covered? as the state has traditionally done, we continue to suggest you figure out what are your objectives and then fund those objectives specifically. If it's enrollment growth, if it's a COLA, if it's debt service increases, retirement, that you're specific about what you'd like. Even when it comes to base increases, the governor has different approaches. For community colleges, he funds a COLA. For UC, CSU, he just provides the 4%, not linked to a COLA. So again, our main message here is just thinking about what you want to achieve. Is it purchasing power, holding it constant? Is it paying for retiree health care cost increases, pension increases? But that you go ahead and prescribe what you think are state priorities for the segments. If you turn to page 56 and 57, it itemizes UC and CSU's capital outlay requests. And I just wanted to make 2 points here. One of the benefits of hearing capital outlay requests in this subcommittee is that you have the unique advantage of being able to make sure your programmatic and your facility decisions are aligned. So if you do fund enrollment growth, then if there are facility requests related to enrollment growth, you're able to consider those in tandem. There are a few UC requests that are driven based upon program expansion, enrollment growth, and again, you might want to revisit those after you've made some of your other decisions. You might also find, given that these lists can be daunting in terms of all the capital projects that come before you, that you might want some priorities. Do you want to fund life safety projects before program expansions? That could help you identify what you want to do within a segment as well as across the segments. And finally, after you've made all these decisions, enrollment growth, operations, COLA, retiree health care, facilities, legislature often thinks about how it wants to share those costs. If you turn to page 63, you can see that even today, even after the tuition increases that occurred during the recession, all three public segments have relatively low fees when you compare them either to their peer institutions or to other community college systems across the state. And if you turn to page 71, you can see what happens in the state's experience with holding fees flat during economic recovery. Economic recoveries when students' families tend to be faring better. Their families might be receiving COLAs, again doing generally better, obviously, than during the recession. And you can see the steep increases in fees during recessions when families tend to be faring worse. This is the state's experience. So what we've been encouraging the state to think about is after you decide what costs are essential, that you think the system is required to both maintain access, to maintain quality, you think about who should bear the cost of those. Should it be entirely the state or should it be shared? Given the state has state and institutional financial aid programs, this tends to be a conversation about should non-needy students, those who don't have financial needs by the way that these programs define them, should they bear any of the extra cost? If their family is doing better, if the state is effectively funding a COLA for the system, should their family be asked to pay a portion of those costs that have been deemed essential for the system? I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Questions from committee members? Mr. Chavez?
I'm sorry I had to run in and out. I've been doing committee meetings. But quickly on your 56, when you said page 56, figure 28, capital outlays related to student growth, I scanned this. In your opinion, which one's student growth?
There's two, Riverside and...
Which one, number 3 down, Riverside? Or is it because there's two Riversides, one in the bottom and one in...
You know, my colleague might help me,
So program expansion or capital renewal and program expansion? I was just taking your advice.
Yes. Well, Paul Golowiski will give you the right answer.
Paul Golowiski with the LEO. The UC has 2 proposals for new facilities that are related to enrollment growth. The first is at the Riverside campus, and that is the third one down in the table. And it's both a modernization of an existing facility as well as constructing an addition to that facility. And the second one is at San Diego, and it is the first one in the table is at the San Diego campus. and it's constructing a new biological and physical sciences building. A lot of the space in that building is for research. Some of it is for instruction as well.
So of all these capital outlay requests, in your opinion, only 2 of them are for student growth?
Yes. We tried to identify in the first column the classification of the project. Some of the ones towards the bottom, which are funding the last phase, the equipment phase, were also related to growth. So at Merced, for example, the fourth one up for the bottom, that also was a new classroom and academic office building. That building's already been built and funded, and what's before you right now is just funding the equipment for that building. So that would be another program expansion, enrollment growth related. I believe those are the only ones. Most of them are related to capital renewals and seismic corrections.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Before we get to public comment, a question for Ms. Kuhn. I wonder if you can comment on the issue that Mr. Ting asked earlier today of President Napolitano, and I asked a couple weeks ago that if you look overall, it's true that the general fund expenditure to the university and the CSU over the past few years has gone down. But when they did increase student fees, by definition, the state of California via the Cal Grant expenditure gives money to the system. So the system is getting a check essentially from the state of California for X amount over years. And they're saying that's not necessarily fair and we're double counting. And are we missing something? Because it seems that we are. I mean, granted, that maybe that's not the right answer, and is saying that that's an appropriate thing that we have doing. But just if you're looking at the dollars provided to the segments, it does seem like that is a valid point that we're making.